November 14th, 1957, 12:47 p.m. 57 of the most powerful crime bosses in America sat around tables in Joseph Barbara's estate in Apalachin, New York, believing they were attending the most secure criminal meeting in history. The location was remote, the security was extensive, and the secrecy had been maintained for months. What they didn't know was that at exactly 1:15 p.m., New York State Police would surround the estate and arrest every single person present. The raid would become the most devastating blow to organized crime in American history. Decades of secrecy would be shattered in a single afternoon. The myth of Cosa Nostra invisibility would be destroyed forever. But the biggest secret of the Apalachin meeting wasn't what happened during the raid. It was who made the raid possible. The man responsible for the most famous organized crime arrests in history was sitting 200 miles away in Harlem, calmly reading about his revenge in the afternoon newspaper. Bumpy Johnson had orchestrated the destruction of the Apalachin meeting because the most powerful crime bosses in America had made one fatal mistake. They had planned a summit about organized crime's future without inviting the most powerful black criminal in the country. To understand how Bumpy Johnson destroyed the Apalachin meeting, you need to understand why he wasn't invited to the most important criminal gathering in American history. The Apalachin meeting was called by Vito Genovese to establish him as the supreme leader of American organized crime. After the attempted assassination of Frank Costello and the mysterious death of Albert Anastasia, Genovese believed he was positioned to become the boss of all bosses, a title that hadn't existed since Salvatore Maranzano's death in 1931. The meeting was scheduled to formalize Genovese's leadership, divide territories among the families, and establish new rules for organized crime operations throughout the United States. September 15th, 1957. Invitations were sent to crime bosses from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, California, Florida, and Illinois. 57 men were invited to attend what was being called the Commission of Commissions, a super meeting of crime family leadership. But there was a problem with the guest list. It included only Italian-American crime figures, black criminals, Irish operators, Jewish gangsters, and other ethnic crime leaders were deliberately excluded. Despite controlling significant territories and generating millions in revenue, they were not considered worthy of inclusion in discussions about organized crime's future. Bumpy Johnson, who controlled more territory than most of the invited bosses, who had more political connections than many of the attendees, who had been operating successfully for longer than some of the crime families themselves, was not invited to the meeting. October 1st, 1957. Bumpy learned about the Apalachin meeting through Detective Raymond Murphy, his source in the NYPD. Bumpy, there's something big happening upstate. All the major families are planning a sit-down. They met at their usual location in Marcus Garvey Park, away from listening ears and watching eyes. What kind of sit-down? Murphy handed Bumpy a manila folder. Everything we know about what they're calling the Apalachin meeting. Vito Genovese is calling together every major family boss in the country. Bumpy studied the intelligence for 15 minutes. The location, the attendees, the agenda. It was the most comprehensive organized crime summit in American history. Ray, I don't see my name on this guest list. That's because you're not invited. They're planning to reorganize American organized crime without including anyone who's not Italian? That's about the size of it. That night, Bumpy made a decision that would change organized crime forever. If he wasn't invited to discuss the future of American criminal operations, there wouldn't be a discussion at all. October 15th, 1957, exactly 1 month before the Apalachin meeting, Bumpy initiated an intelligence operation designed to ensure the meeting's destruction. Through his network of informants, corrupt officials, and street-level sources, Bumpy began gathering detailed information about the meeting. The exact location, the security arrangements, the arrival times, and most importantly, the agenda. What he discovered confirmed his suspicions. The Apalachin meeting wasn't just about establishing Vito Genovese as supreme leader. It was about formalizing the exclusion of non-Italian criminals from organized crime's power structure. The agenda included discussions about eliminating independent operators, establishing territorial control over ethnic criminal organizations, and coordinating responses to non-family criminal activities. In other words, the 57 most powerful Italian-American crime bosses were meeting to discuss how to destroy or subordinate every other criminal organization in America. October 25th, Bumpy confirmed what he'd suspected. The Apalachin meeting was a declaration of war against independent operators like himself. November 1st, 2 weeks before the meeting, Bumpy made contact with Sergeant Edgar Croswell of the New York State Police. Croswell had been investigating organized crime activities in the Apalachin area for months, but he lacked specific intelligence about major criminal meetings. The contact was made through intermediaries, corrupt officials who worked for both Bumpy and law enforcement. The message was simple: detailed information about the largest organized crime meeting in American history in exchange for federal protection against retaliation. November 10th, 4 days before the Apalachin meeting, Sergeant Croswell received an anonymous phone call that provided him with everything he needed to destroy the gathering. The exact location: Joseph Barbara's estate at 625 McFall Road, Apalachin, New York. The date and time: November 14th, 1957. Beginning at 12:30 p.m., the attendees, 57 crime bosses from across America, including Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Joseph Bonanno, and Joe Profaci. The agenda: establishing Genovese as boss of all bosses and reorganizing American organized crime. Most importantly, the caller provided detailed information about security arrangements, arrival schedules, and the layout of the Barbara estate. November 14th, 1957, 12:30 p.m. The Apalachin meeting began as scheduled. 57 crime bosses gathered in Joseph Barbara's estate to discuss the future of organized crime in America. The security was extensive, the location was remote, and the attendees believed they were completely safe from law enforcement surveillance. 12:47 p.m. The last of the invited bosses arrived. Vito Genovese called the meeting to order and began outlining his vision for unified organized crime leadership under his authority. 1:15 p.m., exactly when the anonymous caller had predicted the meeting would reach its most critical phase, New York State Police surrounded the Barbara estate. Sergeant Edgar Croswell led a force of state troopers who had been positioned strategically around the property. They had detailed information about escape routes, security positions, and the location of every attendee. The raid was swift and comprehensive. Within minutes, 57 of the most powerful crime bosses in America were in custody. Cars were impounded, personal belongings were searched, and detailed records were made of every person present. The arrests included Vito Genovese, would-be boss of all bosses; Carlo Gambino, future head of the most powerful crime family in America; Joseph Bonanno, leader of one of New York's 5 family; Joe Profaci, head of what would become the Colombo family; Russell Bufalino, Pennsylvania crime boss; Santo Trafficante, Florida crime leader; and 45 other major organized crime figures from across the United States. The media coverage was unprecedented. For the first time, the American public saw photographs of the men who controlled organized crime. The myth of Cosa Nostra invisibility was destroyed forever. But the most significant impact wasn't the arrests themselves. It was the intelligence gathered during the raid. November 15th, the day after the Apalachin raid, federal investigators found themselves in possession of the most comprehensive intelligence on organized crime they had ever obtained. Personal phone books containing contacts throughout the criminal underworld, financial records detailing money laundering operation, documentation of territorial agreements between crime family, evidence of political corruption reaching into state and federal government. Most importantly, they had confirmation that organized crime in America was far more extensive, sophisticated, and coordinated than anyone had suspected. November 20th, 6 days after the raid, Bumpy Johnson received an unexpected visitor at Small's Paradise. FBI agent William Romer wanted to discuss the Apalachin meeting and the anonymous tip that had made the raid possible. "Mr. Johnson, we know you weren't invited to the Apalachin meeting. We also know you had the intelligence capabilities to provide the information that made our raid successful." Bumpy's response was characteristic. "Agent Romer, I read about the raid in the newspaper same as everyone else. Mr. Johnson, the anonymous caller, provided details that only someone with extensive organized crime connections could have known. Maybe the caller was just a concerned citizen who wanted to see justice done. Mr. Johnson, we're prepared to offer federal protection in exchange for continued cooperation in organized crime investigations. Bumpy leaned back in his chair.
Agent Romer, I run a legitimate business. I don't know anything about organized crime investigations.
The conversation ended without formal agreement, but the understanding was clear. Bumpy Johnson would continue to provide intelligence about organized crime activities that threatened his interests, and federal authorities would ensure his operations remained undisturbed. December 1st, 1957, the consequences of the Apalachin raid became clear. Federal investigations into organized crime increased dramatically. Public awareness of Cosa Nostra reached unprecedented level. Crime family operations were disrupted nationwide. Internal conflicts developed as bosses blamed each other for security failures. Most importantly for Bumpy Johnson, the Italian-American crime family's plan to eliminate independent operators was permanently abandoned. The families were too busy dealing with federal scrutiny to coordinate attacks on non-Italian criminal organizations. Years later, when crime historians analyzed the Apalachin raid, they noted that it marked the beginning of the end for traditional organized crime secrecy. The raid led directly to federal legislation targeting organized crime, increased law enforcement resources, and ultimately to the RICO Act that would devastate crime families in the 1980s. But what crime historians never discovered was the role Bumpy Johnson played in orchestrating the raid. The anonymous phone call that destroyed the Apalachin meeting came from a man who had been excluded from the most important criminal gathering in American history. In response, he had made sure there wouldn't be another one. January 15, 1958, 2 months after the Apalachin raid, Vito Genovese sent word through intermediaries that he wanted to meet with Bumpy Johnson to discuss future cooperation. Bumpy's response was delivered through the same intermediaries. Mr. Genovese, next time you plan a meeting about organized crime's future, you might want to invite everyone who's part of that future.